Hello and welcome back to another full step-by-step PC build guide, and today I'm going to be doing my first mini ITX build of the year in the Thermaltake TR100. If you see any parts you like, you'll find links to everything I've used in the description, so let's make a start by taking a detailed look at the case. Our side panels are magnetically attached. They can simply be popped out from the bottom and then lifted up. And it's exactly the same thing on the other side. Taking a look at the back of our side panels, you can see we've got a magnetically attached dust filter. Simply pop it out from the top and lift it up and away. And we can go ahead and remove our case accessory box. Taking a look at our case's front I/O, we've got a power and reset button, a combined headphone and microphone jack, we've got two USB Type-A ports and a single Type-C port. We've got a mesh panel on the front, although there's no fan mounting slots behind it, and we do have a magnetically attached dust filter behind it. So one option you have with this case is to mount an LCD screen at the top here, and in the case accessory box you get this additional panel that you're going to be able to install the optional screen in. To remove the panel, there's a screw you're going to need to remove, and then we're going to be able to slide the panel towards the left hand side and remove it. So after installing your optional LCD screen to this panel, you're simply going to set it in, and you see you've got screw holes at the back to secure it. You can then set this into place at the front, slide it towards the right hand side, and then you'd secure it again with the screw. Now it is important to say the LCD panel you're going to have to pick up as an optional extra, but this bracket is included with the case. To remove our case's top panel, there's this spring-loaded captive thumb screw at the back we need to loosen. And once it's been loosened, you're able to pull the panel backwards and lift up to remove it. And again, no big surprises with Thermaltake. We've got a magnetically attached dust filter at the top. The only place you're going to be able to mount fans and radiators in this case is at the top, and you're going to be able to mount up to two 120 or 240mm fans, or up to 240 or 280mm radiator. And you're going to mount them on this removable bracket. It's held on with 4 screws, there's 2 at each side. And once all the screws are removed, the bracket can simply be lifted off. So we take a look in from the bottom, you've got this large cutout, and if we just set our power supply into place, this is going to give you access to your power supply switch. And the other thing it's going to do is make a little bit of space, so your extension cable for your power supply can actually protrude slightly from the bottom if you install it in the lowest position. So unfortunately, despite the pretty large cutouts we have at the bottom, there's no dust filter included. The bottom of the case is removable. We've got a thumb screw here we need to loosen, and then we're going to be able to pull the feet towards the back of the case, bring them down and lift them away. So orientating you on the case, on this side you're going to have your motherboard and your power supply. In terms of motherboard support, it only supports mini ITX motherboards, and it's going to be installed here. You can see we've got our 4 standoffs here, and it's going to be installed upside down with the I/O facing towards the rear of the case here. So in the middle of the case we've got this fixed spine, it isn't movable. So in terms of your CPU cooler height, the maximum height is up to 68mm. Over this side is where your power supply is going to go, and I can set a power supply into place to show you. So this is an SFX power supply, although the case will accommodate up to SFXL power supplies, which are the same sort of size here, but a little bit longer. And the maximum length for your power supply is up to 130mm. So you'll see we've got this removable bracket to install your power supply in. So the idea is you take this out of the case, fix your power supply into it, and slot it back in. There is 2 different heights that this bracket can be installed in. So to remove it, there's a screw on each side, and then with both screws removed, the bracket is completely free to remove from the case. So at the back you can see the 2 different heights we can install the power supply in. So out of the box the bracket is installed in the top position, and there is enough space here if you're going to be using an SFX power supply. If you're using an SFXL power supply, it probably is worth dropping it down to the bottom slot, making more room at the top for your cables. So I just want to show you the downside of moving your power supply down to the lower position, and that is that your cable extension for your power supply is going to be sticking out the bottom of the case. And looking in from underneath the case, you will be able to see it. Although if we move the power supply up to the top position, there's nothing sticking out underneath the case. So this is the power supply cable extension I was mentioning. So it's going to go into the bottom of your power supply, and then your wall power cable is going to plug into the other end of the extension cable at the back of the case. So moving over to the other side of the case, this is where your graphics card is going to go. It's going to be installed vertically, and the maximum length supported is up to 360mm. So taking a look at the rear, you can see we've got 3 vertical PCI expansion slot brackets, and the maximum thickness for graphics cards is up to 70mm. Now to simplify installation, it is possible to mount your graphics card to this bracket outside the case and then reinsert the whole thing. So the bracket is held on with 5 screws. And then with all the screws removed, the bracket is free to lift away. So the idea is you're going to fix your graphics card to this and then set the whole thing in. So Thermaltake are keen to make sure your graphics card is well supported, and we've got this GPU support bracket here. So you can see we've got lots of padding here and here for your graphics card to rest on, and the position of this is movable, so you can simply slide it up and down to get it into the right position. So to support the graphics card at this side, we've got this little bracket here, and we've got a number of different slots here we can insert it into. So depending on the thickness of your graphics card, you can pop it into either one of these slots that fits best with it. You can see we've got a screw at the bottom, so all we need to do is tighten up that screw, and that's going to move the bracket further in. So obviously with your graphics card going on this side and your motherboard going on the other side, you're not going to be plugging your graphics card directly into the motherboard. And Thermaltake do include this Gen 4 riser cable with the case. So there's two standoffs here that you're going to be able to secure this end to, and the other end is then going to simply slot over the top and plug into your motherboard. So we'll take a look at it from the top. In terms of that riser cable routing through, there's this little bracket at the top which is going to help hold it down. So it's going to slot through this gap here from one side to the other. And this little bracket is held on with two screws, so we'll go ahead and remove it. So we'll be able to pass our riser cable through, and then this is going to be reattached, helping hold the riser cable in place. In terms of drive mounting, it is possible to mount two 2.5-inch drives at the front, so there's one on each side. So we're over behind where our power supply is going to go. We can set one drive into place, and then we're going to use the screws, the little lip around the outside, to secure it into place. So you can see this one here, you're going to be able to plug your I/O in at the bottom, and this one really shouldn't get in the way because all that's going to be installed here is your power supply. And it's exactly the same process on the other side. So installed on this side, there is some compromises. The drive in place, the maximum length for your GPU is up to 347mm. Without it, you've got up to 360mm. We're now ready to start working on our motherboard, and we're going to be installing the CPU, the bracket for our CPU cooler, our M.2 SSD and our RAM before we put the motherboard into the case. To open our CPU cover, we can push this lever down and out, bring it all the way to the top of the motherboard, and then we can open the socket cover up. We can then carefully lower our CPU down into the socket, making sure we're holding it by the edges and we've got the text the correct way up. There's little notches on the top and the bottom which are going to line up with notches on the CPU, helping hold it in place. Then we can close our socket cover down again. And as we close the lever, the black bit of plastic will pop off, and we'll put it in our motherboard box for safekeeping. We've got 3 screws holding our M.2 SSD heatsink in place, and then with all the screws loosened, we can lift the heatsink off. We'll have some plastic protection on the back of the heatsink we're going to need to remove, and also on the other heat pad. We can then insert our M.2 SSD into the socket, and then as we lower it down, this little clip is going to hold it in place. Then we just need to replace our heatsink. We can go ahead and open the clips on our RAM slots, and then we're going to want to line the RAM up with the slot. Once we're happy everything's lined up, it's just some firm pressure to the RAM and it's going to clip into place. And then it's exactly the same thing with our second stick. Next, we're ready to install the backplate for our CPU cooler. So although we've got an LGA 1851 socket, the spacing is the same as LGA 1700. So we're going to look for the bracket labelled LGA 1700. We do have some double-sided adhesive which will help it stick to the back of the motherboard, although this is a temporary build so I'm not going to use it. And then all we're going to want to do is line it up with the holes in the back of the motherboard and it will simply fall through. Then we just need to take the bag of standoffs labelled LGA 1700 and we're going to screw one onto each corner. Next we can insert the motherboard into the case, line it up with the standoffs at the back, and we'll secure the motherboard into place using 4 of the screws with the flat head from the case accessory box. Next we've got our case cables to plug in. Our HD audio cable is going to go into this header here. So we'll go ahead and plug it in with the HD audio text facing down the way. So our front panel connectors are going to go into this header here. So we're going to plug it in with the front panel text facing into the motherboard. The header just above is for our front panel Type-C cable. So again, we'll go ahead and plug it in. And the header just above is our USB 3.0 cable. So we'll go ahead and get it plugged in. So in these small form factor builds, I do like to cable manage as I go. And we've got this little cable bracket down here which is going to help organize the cables, but we do have plenty of space for spare cable over towards the side of our power supply. So there we go. I think that looks much tidier. There's only the minimum amount of cable sitting in the middle, and I've just pulled all the excess cable in behind our power supply. So this is going to get pushed over here whenever the power supply is installed. And I haven't done a lot of routing for our HD audio cable. It looks to be the perfect length. What I'm planning on doing is installing our riser cable around it, which is going to help manage it at the top. So this brings us on to installing our power supply, and there's only 3 cables we need to plug in. I've plugged in our 24-pin motherboard cable, I've plugged in an 8-pin EPS cable, and I've also plugged in our 12-volt 2x6 cable to power our graphics card. So then we can slot our power supply into the bracket. And importantly, we're going to want to have the fan facing out the way where it's going to get cool air from the side of the case. And we'll secure the power supply to the bracket using 4 of the large power supply screws from the case accessory box. And although we're going to have access to the power button from the bottom of the case, it makes sense just to turn it on now. So before we set the power supply into place, I'm going to have to route the extension cable. So I'm going to bring it along the side of the motherboard. We'll pass it through to the back compartment, and then we're going to be able to slide it through the gap at the bottom. So I'm then just going to lower our power supply down into place and secure it in the top position. And then if we look in from underneath, we're going to be able to slide our power supply cable into place. I'm now just going to route our EPS cable down the side of the power supply, and our EPS header is just at the bottom of the motherboard here. So we'll get it plugged in. And I think the best place for this cable is just having it down the side of the power supply at the bottom of the case. And then we've got our 24-pin motherboard cable, which will get plugged in as well. And again, we are going to have some cable ties to help manage these cables later on. So we're going to be installing our graphics card to the bracket outside the case. So we're going to need to remove the first 2 expansion slot brackets. Then we're going to be able to take our graphics card, line it up with the brackets, and then we can secure it to the bracket using the 2 thumb screws we've just removed. So next we're going to need to install the riser cable to our graphics card. So we can pull this little clip here to open the slot. We'll turn it round and we can just line it up with our graphics card. And once we're happy it's lined up, we can simply push it into place. And once we're happy it's all in place, we can push the cover again to secure the graphics card in the slot. So just before we insert the graphics card into the case, I've got this bracket pulled all the way to the end, and then I'm going to insert the bracket into the furthest slot. Next, I'm going to want to slide the graphics card into the case. We're then going to re-secure the bracket with the 5 screws. And then we can secure the riser cable to the case using 2 of the flat-headed screws, the same ones we used to secure the motherboard to the case. So I've been really struggling to get the screw in this side into place. So what I have done is I've just actually freed the GPU bracket up again, which gives me a little bit of movement to be able to tilt things up again and get it lined up with the standoffs. And now that I've got the riser cable attached to the standoffs, I'm just going to re-secure the bracket to the case. And then we can go ahead and secure our GPU support bracket. And then I'm just going to plug our 12-volt 2x6 cable into the graphics card. And then I'm just going to tuck the excess cable down behind our power supply. So just before we install our riser cable, I want to get our USB cable for our CPU cooler plugged in. So it's just underneath the PCIe slot. And then I'm just going to route this cable up towards the top of the case. So I'm just going to remove the plastic protection from our riser cable. And as I mentioned, I'm just going to loop our power supply and our HD audio cable into the riser cable. There's going to be a loop at the top. So we can line our riser cable up with the motherboard, and then we're just going to simply push it into place. So then we can replace the bracket for our riser cable, and we'll secure it with the 2 screws. So next we're ready to install our AIO, and because a lot of cables are going to be sticking up at the top, if we had the fans under the AIO, they would get stuck in the fan blades. So what I'm actually going to do is install our fans on top of the radiator where they're going to be out of the way. So our fans will connect magnetically if I just bring them into contact with each other. You'll see I'm going to be installing it as exhaust at the top. So it will draw cool air in passively from the sides of the case and exhaust it out the top. We definitely would get much better CPU temperatures if we turned the fans around and had them set to intake at the top. The downside of that is our GPU temperatures would go up and you'd have a whole lot of hot air coming out the side of the case into your face, where it's going to be really unpleasant. The advantage of doing this is it's going to be quite comfortable sitting beside the PC with all the hot air going out the top. And you'll have good GPU temperatures but slightly worse CPU temperatures. Then I'm going to set our fan stroke radiator bracket on top, and then I'm going to take the long radiator screws, pass them down through the bracket, down through the fans and into the radiator. And I'm just going to get them all to catch first of all. And then once we've got all the screws to catch, we can go ahead and tighten them up. In terms of connecting our fans up, you'll notice we have this connector at the side, and we get a fan cable with the I/O. It's going to attach magnetically to the side. So coming from this cable, we've got a PWM fan header. So we're going to plug this into our CPU fan header to power the fans. And the other cables we've got is a 3-pin 5-volt ARGB cable. Now, as these fans are going to be installed at the top of the case, we are not actually going to see them. I'm not planning on plugging this cable in, so I'm just going to wrap it up at the top with some cable ties. The other thing is, with this PWM cable, we probably only need just over half its length. So again, I'm going to shorten it and wrap some of this cable up as well. And the other thing we're going to need to do is slide our Intel bracket onto our CPU cooler. If you are using it from new, there'll be some plastic protection here you need to remove. So I just want to route this USB cable to where it needs to go. So it is going to plug into the bottom of our CPU cooler, so just about here. So I'm going to route it down through our riser cable, down the bottom and out here. And you'll notice that we've got 2 USB cables, we're only going to need 1. So the second one I'm just going to route over behind our power supply and hide it there. Next I'm just going to set our IO loosely up at the top of the case. And what I want to do is route our CPU fan cable before setting it into place. So I'm just going to pass it in through the riser cable. I'm going to bring it down the side of the motherboard. And then we can just set this in loosely. And then we can secure the bracket at the top with the 4 screws. And at this stage we can replace our top panel. And our CPU fan header is this grey fan header here. So we'll just line the cable coming from our fans on the radiator and push it into place. And you can see the reason why I've left the bottom panel off, because it gives us access to all these headers at the bottom that we're going to need. So I think before we install our IO tubes, it does make sense to finally manage these cables. And we do have some cable type down points on the side of our power supply. You'll also see the reason why I've installed the fans at the top of the radiator. Our riser cable is sitting right down on top of the radiator, so there was fans here and would be stopping the fan blades from spinning. Next I'm going to add some thermal paste to the center of the CPU. Then we can line our CPU cooler up with the bracket, and then we've just got a thumb screw to go into each corner. And then it's just a matter of tightening each corner up in turn. I'm just going to route the fan cable down to the bottom of the case, and we can go ahead and get it plugged into our AIO pump header, which is beside our CPU fan header. And we're going to be able to plug our USB cable into the pump. And we can use a few cable ties to manage the cables at the bottom. And then last thing to do is just route our tubes. So I'm just going to route them over the side of the power supply. Just use a wee cable tie to hold the cables down. So at this stage we can replace the bottom panel. And we can replace our side panels. Okay, so that's the build complete. You'll notice I've gone ahead and set things up off camera. The reason for that is I've made a full guide to setting your PC up after you've built it, and you'll find a link to that video in the description. The only thing I won't show you is how to set up the AIO, but again, I have another video covering that, and you'll find a link to it as well. In terms of our temperatures, our Intel Core Ultra 7 265K idled at 40 degrees and reached a maximum of 87 degrees during a 10-minute IDA64 stability test. Our MSI Vanguard 5080 idled at 31 degrees and reached a maximum of 65 degrees under load. In terms of noise, we had average noise levels of 32 decibels at idle and 51 decibels under load. So in terms of the noise levels, the PC is whisper quiet sitting on the desk beside me. The fans in the GPU aren't going to spin up under idle conditions, and it's really only the 2 fans in the radiator that are making noise, and they're not making an awful lot of it. When the PC is under load, there is a reasonable amount of noise, and there is a little bit of vibration noise from the system as well. So GPU temperatures are good, but our CPU is definitely running a little bit hotter than what it would do in a bigger system. That's no surprise. We've only got a 280mm IO at the top set to exhaust, and we've got no source of intake. It's taken air passively in through the vented panels. So it is the price you pay for a smaller PC on your desk. Your CPU is going to run slightly hotter than what it would do in another system with lots of fans bringing cool air into it. So moving on to my experience of building in the case, the main issue I had was that after I built the PC and tried to power it on, it would power on, but it wouldn't post. I narrowed the problem down to the graphics card, and then discovered that the riser cable had become dislodged at the motherboard. The motherboard I'm using features ASUS's Q-Slim technology, so when you pull the graphics card, or the riser cable in this case, from the right hand side, it will pull out of the slot, but when you pull it from the left hand side, it won't. So obviously when I was routing cables at the top, I must have given the riser cable a tug from one side and dislodged it from the slot. So again, that's something to be careful of. The riser cable also caused me a little bit of bother down at the bottom as well. No problems getting the graphics card into the case, but when I tried to screw the riser cable down to the standoffs, I did struggle. So again, I think if you are having issues with that, you might be safer just to leave those screws out, because what actually happened to me was it did actually pull the graphics card slightly out of the riser cable. Another thing to be really careful of is make sure you install your radiator at the bottom and your fans on the top. There's absolutely no way that you're going to be able to fit fans beneath the radiator. The riser cable just sticks up and it would obstruct the fan blades. So unless you're going to want to go with fan grills, and again, it doesn't make an awful lot of sense to do this when you can just alter the position of the fans and the radiator. In terms of building in the case, just take care as you're doing it. I would cable manage as you go, and I think Thermaltake have done a good job with the cables. They're of a good length, and there's plenty of good places where you can actually manage them nicely. So in terms of the things I liked about the case, the first thing I like about the case is the price. Just under £100 in the UK, and for a case that comes with a riser cable included, this is pretty good value for money. Other things I like, I think it's a pretty good looking case. Build quality is excellent throughout, as you would expect coming from Thermaltake. And because the case is slightly on the bigger side, you've got pretty good hardware compatibility, particularly with large modern graphics cards. Moving on to the things I didn't like about the case, and the first thing I don't like about this case is the lighting at the front of it. Power indicator LED is blue, and the hard drive indicator LED is a flashing red. I just don't think it looks great at the front of the case. And because Thermaltake have included a single front panel connector, you have no option but to plug these in. Another decision I'm not a big fan of is the inclusion of the Gen 4 riser cable. I think given that the 50 series cards are here, a Gen 5 riser cable would have been better, or at least have an option to offer a version of the case that comes with a Gen 5 riser cable that you can pay a little bit more for. Final thing I didn't like was the absence of a dust filter on the bottom of the case, and there is quite large holes there. And I thought Thermaltake had done such a good job of covering the rest of the case with dust filters, it was a shame to leave the bottom unfiltered. So putting everything together, if you are in the market for a small form factor case, then I can definitely recommend the TR100 from Thermaltake. If you have enjoyed this full step-by-step PC build guide, please remember to give it a thumbs up. And if you're not currently subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button as well. Thanks for watching.